Morning, church. Hope you all had a wonderful Christmas and looking forward to a great new year. It's kind of my habit as I read through the Bible when I'm studying at my desk to have a pad beside me, and a thought will hit me and I'll just jot that thought down. And the other day we had caregivers meeting. They meet once a month, and I always enjoy going in there, and we spend about a half hour together and a little Bible study, and I was thinking about what I was going to share with them. And I looked down and I looked at these notes that I jotted to myself, and I thought, I think I'll just share these thoughts with them. And I did, and afterwards I had a couple of them say, you ought to take that and preach that as a sermon to everybody. And so I'm going to take that and preach that as a sermon to everybody. I had a collection of thoughts. Now, when you look at that title, I didn't know how else to put it, because this is how it is. This is some stuff that Paul taught me kind of accidentally, sort of, in that this isn't explicit teaching from Scripture where you open up and read the passage, and yet it's principles that I have found in his life and in things that happened to him that I think are incredibly applicable to all of us. And I jotted down about 10 of those, and I'm going to share with you 5 of them this morning, but I think you'll find them helpful. They certainly have been to me, particularly as we look at beginning this new year and maybe some new attitudes and things. Here's the first one. You can be in God's will up to your neck and be up to your neck in rabid skunks. Now you say, rabid skunks. Thank you. Carol and I were out walking several years ago. We were heading up Benge toward 2 Mile. And as we were crossing a pasture, it was a pasture at that time, east of the house, here came this skunk out of nowhere. And I mean, he's barreling, got his tail up, and he's coming straight for us. Now, skunks don't do that. At least not healthy skunks, not as far as I know. And the first thing that went through my mind was, is this a rabid skunk? And he came and just right across the road in front of us, not very far from us, never looked at us, never paid a lick of attention to us, and kept right on going across through. And I was really proud that he ignored me. But I've been thinking the other day, I don't know if you saw in the newspaper, there were a couple back east, a rabid coon got into their house. I don't know if you saw that or not. Attacked their pets and just made a mess, tore things up terribly. There are times in our lives where figuratively, I think we feel like we're surrounded by rabid skunks. And one of the things that we need to consider is, if we believe that we're doing what's right and God is guiding us in what we're doing, not always when you do the right thing are people going to applaud. Not always when you do the right thing are people going to approve, and we need to understand that and appreciate that. And not back off from speaking up for what's right and doing what's right because people are criticizing or attacking what we're doing. And this is what I see with the Apostle Paul. Let me share with you the passages that brought this to mind. In Acts chapter 16, beginning in verse 6, just let me read verses 6 through 10 and listen to what Luke shares with us. Paul and his company, went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. And when they had come up to Mysia, they attempted to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So, passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas. And a vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia was standing there, urging him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And when Paul had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go into Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. And so here's a situation where Paul clearly has been trying to figure out where he needs to go and preach the gospel. He has felt strongly, I need to go to Asia. That hadn't worked out. I need to go to Bithynia. That hadn't worked out. I need to go to Mysia. That hasn't worked out. Obviously, that's not God's will. I can just picture Paul. Okay, God, where am I supposed to go? Who am I supposed to be preaching to? Bam, here's the vision. And in the vision, here's this man saying, come over to Macedonia and help us. Direction from God. This is where I need to go. I need to go to Macedonia. And so what do? They pick up and they go to Macedonia. Is there any question at this point? Are they in God's will? Are they doing what God has directed them to do? They absolutely are, okay? And so he goes over and he goes to Philippi in Acts chapter 16, and he preaches the gospel there. And what happens? He's beaten, isn't he? And he and Silas are placed in stocks. And so here he is at midnight, remember? He and Silas are doing kind of a devotional at midnight. They're in prison, in the stocks. God sends this earthquake. The stocks fall off. They're released from prison by the jailer after they've had a chance to teach the jailer the gospel and so on. But don't you think when he's sitting there on that, I suppose, stone or dirt floor, and he's in stocks and chains, and he's hurting because he's been beaten, he's asking himself, you did want me to come to Philippi, right? You wanted me to come to Macedonia. It ain't working out so well. And so he leaves Philippi, and he goes on to Thessalonica. And what happens at Thessalonica? He's still in Macedonia, okay? He goes to Thessalonica. What happens? Well, the disciples have to hurry him out by night because of the riots that are being caused by his preaching. But Lord, you wanted me to come to Macedonia, right? And here I am preaching, I'm getting run out of town again. And so he heads to Berea. And what happens in Berea? He's forced to leave Berea because the Jews have followed him from Thessalonica and they've run him out of Berea. God, didn't you want me in Macedonia? Yeah, I did. He did. And our church is going to be established at Thessalonica and Philippi that we will read letters written back to about. And won't one of those churches that is established at Philippi, where he had such difficulties, become a sending church for Paul and a church with which Paul will have a very special relationship? It absolutely will. Brethren, can you be doing God's will and up to your neck in rabid skunks? Yes, you can. If you're seeking to do what's right and you're following God's will and things are difficult and they're hard, that's not because, don't question, am I doing what's right? Just understand that you can do what's right and don't necessarily expect a positive reaction to that. Because it may be, but it may not. A man I admire greatly moved to India, a single guy, and he was preaching the gospel in Mumbai, in India. And I mean, Craig, I've never known a more sincere man than Craig Phillips. Craig, he lived with the Indian people. Okay, and that means in dirt and dire poverty. He lived with them. They don't eat meat, so he decided, I'm not going to eat meat either. They drink filthy water. He decided he was going to try to drink filthy water. That put him in the hospital. That didn't work so well. He had to see that there's some stuff he just couldn't do. But I mean, this man desperately wanted to share the gospel with Hindu people. The Hindus, some, not all, but some of the Hindus took him and beat him till they nearly killed him. And he was blamed for that and ended up having to leave India. Okay, government ordered him to leave. Now, was he doing what's right? Was he in God's will? He absolutely was. Was that the kind of reaction that you would hope to receive? Absolutely not. But you cannot judge the rightness of what you're doing by the reaction of the people to it. And I think that's an important principle in an increasingly hostile society that we need to recognize and understand. Standing up for what's right, teaching the truth is not always going to make you popular. It's not going to be the kind of thing that's necessarily going to make you friends, quote unquote. But it's very important that you keep your eye on the ball, and the ball is doing God's will. The ball is sharing His Word. And so, number one, you can be in God's will and find yourself up to your neck in rabid skunks. Number two, some folks are never going to love you back, but that doesn't stop you loving them. There were members of the church in Jerusalem and Judea that are going to have a very difficult time forgiving Paul for what he had done. In Acts chapter 9, verses 26 through 31, Paul comes back to Jerusalem after his conversion in Damascus. And I'm quoting out of verse 26, speaking of the Christians in Jerusalem and Judea, they were all afraid of him. They're scared to death of him. Now, he's been converted, all right? He has given his heart to the Lord. He is going to be preaching the gospel. But the closest I can come to something, a parallel, would be if Osama bin Laden had suddenly announced that he was a Christian. Would a lot of people had a very, very difficult time with Osama bin Laden as Christian? Trusting him? Absolutely would. Paul, in his own words, has wreaked havoc in the church. He's put people in prison. He is holding the cloaks of those who stoned Stephen. I mean, this is the man that gave Christians nightmares. And now he's become a child of God. Can you understand why the Christians would go, I don't know. In fact, the situation is so cold, so difficult. Barnabas takes him kind of under his wing, but ultimately they will usher him off to Tarsus, back to his hometown. And Paul will spend years in Tarsus. But it's always on his heart. It's always on his heart, those brethren in Judea and Jerusalem. And on at least two different occasions, he is going to collect money and take money back to the needy saints in Judea and Jerusalem. And yet, the second time here, Acts 22 through 26, when he comes back to do that, he's greeted by the brethren, and they take him in, but they say, you know, Paul, there's a lot of people here still questioning you. And they ask him to do some things that involve going to the temple. He agrees to do it, but it causes a riot. It causes a riot. And Paul will be arrested, his life threatened. He'll be incarcerated in Jerusalem, and then he'll spend 2 years incarcerated in Caesarea. And there's no indication the church comes to his rescue. You don't read about the brethren supporting him. You don't. And maybe they did, but the Scripture's silent on it if they did. Paul never stopped loving them, even though that love wasn't necessarily returned. Bottom line, brothers and sisters, we all face consequences, don't we? For the things that we do. We live with those consequences. And sometimes those consequences mean there are going to be some people, they may never quite be able to let go of a hurt that you brought to them, a difficulty that you caused in their lives. That doesn't mean you stop loving them and caring for them and always seeking their highest good. Whether they respond as you want. I'll guarantee, I don't think there's any doubt, Paul just ached for the brethren there to forgive him and to accept him. And I'm not saying that they didn't forgive him, but I don't know that they ever really were able to truly, totally accept him. But he never stopped loving them, never stopped caring for them. I got a dear friend who made a mess out of his life, and we all know people like this, but I mean, he made a mess. Left a wife who loved him and cared about him, deserted kids, made a mess. He's done his best since then to turn his life around, rectify that, get back right with the Lord. But he's got kids that won't speak to him and grandkids he's never seen. And I ache for him. Okay? But all I can tell him is, love him. That's all you can do, is keep on loving him and pray and see what happens. But that's life. It was life for Paul, and it's life for you and me. Some folks are never going to love you back, but that doesn't stop you loving them. Thirdly, sometimes God will, other times He won't. He won't fix it, He won't save you, He won't pull your fat out of the fire, but he might. And we need to understand how important it is to recognize that he does things according to his will and his plan, not necessarily ours and what we want. And I start out here with an example that is in the context of the life of Paul. It doesn't have directly to do with Paul, but to me it's a tremendous example of the principle that I'm talking about here. In Acts 12, remember the Apostle James is arrested by Herod, and Herod beheads him. As far as we know, that's the first of the apostles to die as a martyr, okay? And how must his family have felt? And the brethren who loved him, okay, he's gone. And then Herod arrests Peter and tosses Peter in prison. Oh boy, here we go again. And the church members gathered and they're praying for Peter, that somehow Peter's life will be spared, that God will provide for Peter. And of course, miraculously, that's exactly what happened. Peter gets out of prison, goes to the house where the brethren are praying, and they can't believe. Read it, it's funny. They can't believe he's actually been out. They're praying for him to be released, and when he is, they're shocked. Okay? But he's released. He's set free. Question. If you're James' wife, how come James had to die and Peter didn't? If you're James' brother, how come James had to die and Peter gets out of prison? God, I don't understand. Stuff happens like that, doesn't it? All the time. One lives, one dies, one's saved, one's not, one's delivered, one isn't. God, I don't understand. Brethren, we don't have to understand. We've got to trust that he knows more about what's going on than we do. In Acts 14, Paul, outside of Lystra, they will take him and I believe stone him to death. And if he's not dead, he might as well be. I mean, imagine people taking rocks, big old rocks, and standing over you and throwing them at your head and on you till they kill you. And they leave him for dead, okay? Which means he's at best unconscious, but he's been beaten to death with rocks. And he's going to pop up and go back into the city. Is that a miracle? That's a miracle. Now, whether he was dead and raised from the dead, or whether he was just beat just short of dead and God healed him and brought him, either way, okay, look at what he went through. Now, you go to Acts 28, and he's out gathering sticks after that shipwreck, and he's on that island, and this viper bites him, and everybody sees the viper bite him. Everybody's standing around waiting for him to die, and he doesn't die. Doesn't even get sick. Nothing happens to him. God spares him from that viper bite. Now, why did God let people beat him to death with stones in Acts 14 and let him survive a viper bite without any harm in Acts 28? Have you ever thought about that? You suppose Paul ever thought about that? An answer? I don't know. I don't know. But that's what happened. Remember Jesus' prayer in the garden. What's his prayer? Yet not my will, but thine be done. In your life and mine, can you look back in your life and see times when God's hand worked and it spared you, saved you, cared for you, intervened for you, made all the difference in the world? And other times when you're going, "Phew, that was just tough." Yeah? Because you see, we don't get the whole picture. I was talking to a fellow one time and he said something real interesting. He said, you know, a chess master can look at a chessboard and the really brilliant ones can see dozens of moves ahead. Now, how in the world they do that, I don't know. But they can picture where these pieces are going to be and where their opponent might move their piece and picture all these alternatives and play this game in their head, and it's amazing to me they can do that. Here's what he said. He said, Dan, God's got 6 billion pieces on the board. 6 billion pieces. And he knows where every one of them has to move. And he knows what's best in the case of every one of them. Now think about that. And when we're going, I don't get it, I don't understand. How come this isn't working out like I think it ought to work out? You understand. I understand. Need to understand. God knows what's best. And those pieces are being moved as those pieces need to be moved to accomplish His will. And it may anger us, it may hurt us, it may frustrate us because we don't get it. But that doesn't mean that God's not in control, that those pieces aren't being moved ultimately in His will. Fourth principle, you never fail. Some efforts are just more successful than others. When you're serving God, I believe you never fail. Paul's evangelistic efforts will result in thriving churches in Thessalonica and Philippi, in Corinth, and in Ephesus. But he goes to Athens in Acts 17, preaches that magnificent sermon on Mars Hill, and basically gets what? A great big yawn. Yeah, come back and we'll talk more about this later on. Okay? It just it's hard soil, brothers and sisters, just like Jesus said in Matthew 13. It's hard soil. And he preaches this powerful message, and it just kind of bounces off the dirt. And not much of the seed sinks in at all. There are a few conversions, read about it, but you will never read about the church in Athens. You'll never read about a thriving congregation there. Did Paul fail? No, he didn't fail. He shared the same word that brought a great harvest in a place like Ephesus. That becomes a mother church. Churches will be planted all over Asia because of the work that he does in Ephesus. It's not the message, it's the soil. Okay? But understand, you never fail. Sometimes you're just more successful, it seems, in some places than in others, as far as a harvest goes. Think about Acts 24 through 26. Paul has an opportunity to stand before two incredibly important men, in Felix and Agrippa. One will say, you're acting like a crazy man. And the other one will say, I'll come back sometime later, we'll talk about this some more. Neither one of them are going to respond. Did Paul fail? Again, I would argue, no, he doesn't fail. He doesn't fail. He's sharing the good news. Okay? Sometimes people respond, sometimes they don't. But you never fail. Some efforts are just more successful than others. One of the things that was such a blessing to me through the years was being able to go to foreign countries and preach the gospel there and see people respond to the gospel. You see, the word's still powerful. The story still touches hearts. It makes a difference. There are a lot of hard soil in this country. Soil all over the world ain't hard, okay? There's some good soil around. That's one of the blessings, I believe, of going out to the prison. There's no surface, well, I'm just fine, I'm okay, everything's good. No, you're in prison for a reason, okay? And this idea, I'm not that bad a person, and they're just more open. And you have an opportunity to see the word work and to see hundreds of people respond to the gospel message. Brethren, you never fail. Some efforts are just more successful than others. And lastly, don't quit till you're done. And you're not done till it's over. That certainly holds true with the Apostle Paul. And that needs to be a truism in all of our lives. Paul's work as an apostle only lasted about 20 years. I think when a lot of people think of his work, I don't know how you see that frame, but in actuality, his work as an apostle only lasted about 20 years. During that time, he's going to be beaten with 40 lashes at least 5 times. Now think about that. 40 lashes, that's 39, 5 different times. He'll be beaten with rods 3 times, stoned, left for dead. He'll endure at least 4 shipwrecks. He'll be imprisoned on multiple occasions, and he never quit. How many of us, after that first beating, would there ever be a second? Or would we just head back home? First time they came after you with rods, would there be a second time they came after you with rods? And a third time? Do you understand why God chose Paul? He's stubborn. He will not quit. As we talked about before, he sees himself as dead. I have died with Christ. It's no longer I who live. Christ lives in me. And if they come after me, they're coming after the Christ. They're not coming after me. And he kept on. And so you come to 2 Timothy 4, 6 through 8, that beautiful, beautiful passage. I'm being poured out like a drink offering. Okay? I'm ready to be sacrificed. I've fought a good fight. I've finished the course. I've kept the faith. Henceforth there's laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me in that day. And not to me only, but to all those who love his appearing. You see, when did he quit? He never quit. You don't quit till you're done. You're not done till it's over. Paul never quit. He's sitting in a prison cell under a death sentence, and what's he doing? Writing letters. Checking on how things are going. Encouraging Timothy. How's the church doing? Here's what you need to do. You see, he never quits. And brethren, that needs to be our spirit. Okay? You may retire from your job. You never retire from the Lord. You never retire from your relationship with him. Okay? You never retire from your life and your service as a child of God. You don't quit till you're done. And you're not done till it's over. And God will let you know when it's over. Okay? And then it'll be time to go home. And it'll be okay. And so, 5 things that Paul kind of accidentally sort of taught us, but I think they're important principles. You can be in God's will and be up to your neck in rabid skunks, but you're in God's will. Don't forget that. And don't let that cause you to stop when people don't react like you would love for them to react. Understand you're serving God, not them. And what matters is his opinion, not theirs, okay? Some folks are never going to love you back. That doesn't stop you loving them. Sometimes God will, other times he won't. Fix it, save you, pull your fat out of the fire. That's up to God. Our call is to trust him. You never fail. Some efforts are just more successful than others. You don't quit till you're done, and you're not done till it's over. May these be some guiding principles for us as we begin what hopefully will be a blessed and exciting new year in 2019. If we can help you to begin your walk with the Lord this morning as you put him on in baptism, or encourage you in some way, won't you come? While we stand and while we sing.
Let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich. Let the blind say, I can see. It's what the Lord has done in me. Let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich. Let the blind say, I can see. It's what the Lord has done in me. Hosanna, Hosanna, to the Lamb that was slain. Hosanna, Hosanna, Jesus died and rose again. Into the river I will wade. There my sins are washed away. From the heavens mercy streams of the Savior's love for me. I will rise from waters deep into the saving arms of God. I will sing salvation songs. Jesus Christ has set me free. Hosanna, Hosanna, to the Lamb that was slain. Hosanna, Hosanna, Jesus died and rose again. Hosanna, Hosanna, Jesus died and rose again. Let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich. Let the blind say, I can see. It's what the Lord has done in me. Be seated, please.